You're listening to the Bird Dog Babe podcast with my mom, Courtney Bastion.
Pads of feet on dogs are just like us, except more advanced, I feel, and fancier. They have really thick calluses. They've got these pads that form around the ground that they're walking on. And so making sure that they're just physically fit, because if they're not physically fit, they're going to be having muscle pain, they're going to be running strange, they're going to put more pressure on their feet. So making sure that they're just ready for hunting season, just like we're supposed to be ready for hunting season as well. Exercise before we go out is really important to get the whole body ready. And if they're exercising, and running, primarily on different substrates, I think that's the most important thing, is thinking about, where does my dog live most of the time and where are we going to be hunting?
Hey, Bird Dog Babes. My name is Courtney Bastion, and I am obsessed with all things bird dogs. And I'm here with you to share the stories, experiences, knowledge, and opinions from the women and a few guys in the industry that are killing it. I'm a Wisconsin girl living in a Montana world. I'm mom and two incredible kiddos, wife and occasional assistant to a pro gun dog trainer, traveling the U.S. talking about canine nutrition while hunting, breeding, and competing with my German wire hair pointers and Bracco Italianos. As someone who started hunting later in life because I wanted to give my dogs the opportunity to do what they were bred to do, I'm here to help inspire, educate, and connect women to get their bird dogs out in the field and experience a bond like no other. So pour yourself a glass of wine and get ready to be challenged and encouraged while you learn. This is the Bird Dog Babe podcast. Today's episode is with Dr. Meg of On Point Veterinary Services. She is my first repeat guest, and, well, she rocks. She joined me previously on episode 14 for Bird Dog First Aid, and it's one of the most popular episodes of this podcast. No surprise, because we went pretty in depth with the essentials. So if you haven't listened to that episode already, be sure you do. Once a month, I hold a Q&A session exclusive to the Bird Dog Babe Patreon patrons. And Dr. Meg joined us in November to discuss Bird Dog Paw Care. Because if you've hunted your dog more than a few days in a row this year, you know the importance of this topic. If you had a 5 or more day hunting trip planned this season with only 1 to 2 dogs, your trip may have been cut short due to how your dog's paws held up. So I'm sharing this Patreon patron episode with all of our listeners. With Dr. Meg's approval, of course, because this info is one that all of you need to know. This is the last episode of 2020, and I have some exciting changes, new partners, and more learning and hunting events coming in 2021. I'm beyond grateful for all the Bird Dog Babe Patreon patrons that support this podcast. If you haven't already, please head over to the Apple Podcast and leave a rating, review, and subscribe to help me out. I'm wishing all of you a happy, healthy, and prosperous 2021. All right, let's get after it. Thank you to sponsor Dakota 283, unparalleled protection for traveling to and from your favorite hunting spot. Dakota 283 kennels are premium quality roto-mold with recessed handles on top for convenient and safe tie-down and makes it easy to lift up into the truck. I love the secure door frame with high security locks so I know my dogs are safe when I need to stop for fuel. An added bonus is the drain hole in the back, which makes cleaning a breeze when your dog has been run hard and put away wet. Head over to Dakota283.com and use promo code BirdDogBabe for a 10% discount. Thanks to sponsor Xcel Shooting Sports, elite dealer of Caesar Guarini, Fab Arm, and Siren shotguns. Siren is the world's only full line of shotguns created for the female competitor, hunter, and shotgun enthusiast. Xcel is one of only 4 demo centers west of the Mississippi. They give you the opportunity to actually try out a gun before you walk out the door with it. As an elite dealer for Caesar Guarini, Xcel offers their customers unlimited pit stops of free service and tune-ups on all shotguns, a great way to have your gun in top condition for the upcoming hunting or target season. In addition, they're offering an exclusive deal to all of the Bird Dog Babe listeners for a free gun slip with each purchase, a $90 value.
All right. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Meg, to talk about bird dog paws and the prevention, maintenance, and treatment, because our bird dogs are having some issues with their feet out in the field. Lots of things can go wrong.
No, they certainly do. I think you'll always have something at the end of every hunt. And I think that's to be expected. And I think just learning what's important, what's not, when do they need a break, when do they not, that's what matters most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are some ways that we can, I guess, work on conditioning them before season starts? Is there even a way to toughen up pads or, I guess, kind of prepare them for the different types of terrain that they might come across?
Yeah. So, I think pads of feet on dogs are just like us, except, more advanced, I feel, and fancier of, they have really thick calluses. They've got, these pads that form around the ground that they're walking on. And so making sure that they're just physically fit, because if they're not physically fit, they're going to be having muscle pain. They're going to be running strange. They're going to put more pressure on their feet. So making sure that they're just ready for hunting season, just like we're supposed to be ready for hunting season as well. Exercise before we go out is really important to get the whole body ready. And if they're exercising, and running, primarily on different substrates, I think that's the most important thing, is thinking about, where does my dog live most of the time and where are we going to be hunting? Sometimes I think it can be hard, especially if you're going to do like a big trip. I just had one of my friends who follows you. She lives over on the East Coast, and they, went from New York all the way over to North Dakota and kind of hunted along the way. So you're changing all sorts of terrain and what birds you're chasing as you go along. And so a dog who grows up, and is worked primarily in the city, or on a nice, very manicured, green, lush grass lawn, are going to have different things happening with their feet when we then go and expose them to chucker country or something like that. So I think there's ways to condition paws. They're all time consuming. There is no quick fix. There are lots of products out there in regards to hardening pads and all of these things. I think, as with most things, the process that takes the longest, if it feels like it's a shortcut, it probably is a shortcut. It takes time. Your dog is not going to be ready to go in a weekend. And unfortunately, that's what most of us do. And so we end up with dogs that are lame for a week. I've done it myself a bazillion times. We're all guilty of it. But in a perfect world, we'd be thinking about this regardless of where you live. If you live in the city, or if you live in the country, or you live in the burbs, there are dirt roads that you can find. There are tracks that you can find. If you're in a city, I used to live in Portland. I used to take my girls running on the local high school track. That rubberized material, it's soft on their feet, but also a little hard and abrading. You can build up their pads that way. Just walking on sidewalks, or finding those gravel and dirt roads, again, are everywhere. There is a logging road in every state. You can find it, and it's not that much of a drive. But running these guys on those different materials, doing river runs, if you're near a river, being down in the rocks and the sand, lots of different substrates is just really important. Dogs that are working dogs in the Army, they have done the same thing. They've done lots of studies of showing, what do we need to train our dogs on to get them ready to be deployed. And so, they work with not only, does sand hurt your paws? It's hot, it's abrasive, but it also moves. So they found, these dogs were pulling up lame when they were going overseas. and being deployed, and it was more so because the surface that they were on was all of a sudden unsteady. So when they would run, they're tilting back and forth. And again, I think we can bump into that with our dogs as well. Lots of different outdoor time, activity time, running and breaking. That's what we need to get their pads ready. And most of these dogs, once they develop decent calluses, they keep them pretty dang well.
Are we going to be able to notice what a callus looks like?
Especially as they age, a dog's feet are gonna change. And so you will, if you think back to if anyone, when you had a puppy, I love puppy feet because they're so soft, and they're like touching velvet. There's nothing to them. They don't feel thick. They're just wonderful to play with. But as they start to grow up, they'll get more of this keratin layer. And so that'll be kind of this almost kind of hairy little flakiness that's on the pad. Different breeds are going to have different feet. And so that's also something to consider. Some might have really large pads. They're prone to having really heavily keratinized pads, and other dogs are not as much. In general, I do think dogs who are lighter in color, or have, if you have a breed that has a lighter variation, so like I run setters and I have tricolors, and then I have a red and white, which I feel it's a softer color. Red and whites in general, I think, tend to have softer feet than some of our other breeds that, have dark colored pads. They seem to have more keratinized cells that are just naturally there. I don't know if you've noticed that. You run your Broncos, that's kind of a lighter color versus your wire hairs if they have
that they're darker, right? And now that you say that about the puppy paws, so they are like a softer and a darker color too, right?
They are, yeah. All of those things, it takes a while for calluses to form. And I think, most dogs will have a pretty decent callus that develops, even if they live a posh life. The Chihuahuas that ride in bags, they still naturally are going to develop some layer of callus on their feet. And most dogs will have a pretty decent callus level, 6 to 8 months of age. But that makes you have to remember, these dogs, like first years out in the field, their feet may not quite be up to it versus our, 2-year-olds and above who are running, because they've had more time to really lay down heavy layers of keratin and callus that builds up.
Okay. So I really start pushing my dogs conditioning wise, like 6 weeks before. Well, I do it all through the year because they're testing and trialing. But if when it's really time to get down, we're 6 weeks out of hunting season, I'm pushing them pretty hard. And do you think 6 weeks is enough time to work up that foot?
I think that it certainly can help. And again, from the muscle standpoint and just their agility and their ability to react, they're going to be stronger in general. So they're not going to be landing so hard. They're going to be light on their feet. You kind of think about when you get really tired, every step seems like it's heavy and it hurts. I do think the same thing's happening with our dogs. So we want to make them very light-footed. So they're bouncing off those pads. They're going to their next stop. And if they're in shape, they're going to be able to do that. And so, I think with 6 weeks, you probably can get ready. If you're going to really do something, the more extreme of our upland hunting, if you're going to be chukar hunting, or, you're drifting down into, the Southwest to chase quail after you've been wintering up in the Great Lakes, that's where I think it can be hard. And some of it, you may have to kind of, get their feet used to things once you're down there a little bit, and know that you're going to have to take some time off because it's going to hurt their feet. And then you might need to take a few days off so they can recover.
Okay. What about like when I've been conditioning, I call it, I've blown their pads. A couple dogs will, because we have really rocky gravel terrain here on our roads. And I am letting them either free run or roading them on with a harness. And So when a pad is blown, I mean, I feel like, does it even ever grow back to the full extent of what it was before that?
They will. I think you can get into a dangerous cycle where you are going to re-injure the same spot again and again.
Yeah.
Primarily because we don't want to do, the horrible 4-letter word that your veterinarian recommends of rest. Nobody likes the word rest.
Right.
But you're not going to regrow a nice callus if you've flaked your entire callus off your carpal pad, which they tend to the carpal pad's the big pad on their paw, and so they tend to blow the upper part of it, and they tend to blow the tips of their toes, and they tend to blow it on the front feet much more than they're gonna on the back feet, because dogs bear most of their weight on their front feet. Breaking tends to be what hurts feet. So if they're hunting and they're doing a lot of switchbacks, so with training, if you're going up or you're requiring the dogs to be changing speeds a lot, that's where you're going to start to have that stop and go is what's going to shear a pad off. And it's avoidable. Ideally you want to check their feet as you're going along with your training. And what you'll start to notice is before the callus actually blows off or you're causing flaking, you'll start to get some shiny spots on the pad, because you've literally polished off the callus at that point. You might start to see, but by the time you start to see pink and bruising happening, most likely that's going to flake later. It's kind of like getting a blood blister under your pad. So you're kind of edging into the point of no return that you're going to expect this thing is going to flake apart later. But it's amazing how quickly these will happen. On my little red and white setter, even with conditioned feet, if I run her on a really steep trail that has any sort of like grit or sandiness to it, because she also runs at Mach 5,000, and she'll summit 50 times by the time I finally summit. She slams those feet and she almost always flakes her feet. I kind of expect her to do that.
Okay.
But so some dogs are going to always be prone to it, and it's going to be hard to avoid. And it's more avoiding those styles of hunts, especially if you want to keep hunting for several days in a row. Some dogs are going to be tough. My other dog, same hunt, same conditioning, almost never flakes her feet. But again, different coloring, stronger feet.
Mm-hmm. So when we do that, so whether it's in conditioning, and we blow that pad, or whether we're out hunting, you get out there, you have a week trip, and your first day or second day, a pad blows, and you only have that dog or one other dog. Can you even work that dog again, or what can we do?
That's a real bummer, because, so if you're going to do that, try to do that on your last day of hunting. If you do it on a first day, it can be really tough to recover from that. You might be able to push them, but then that you're definitely going to be sitting it out after that. And at the end of the day, it is painful for these dogs. So, the best thing is to avoid it, so that doesn't happen to you, because otherwise you're going to have to make a choice where you're going to push your dog into hunting. That it's going to be painful for them. They're going to want to go, of course. And then they're going to be in a lot of pain after you're done. I think ideally you really want to avoid it. If it has happened, if you actually have flaking of the callus, that even though it can be impressive how much will flake off, and I know in the invitation for this that you sent, you had a picture of it, of a paw flake. Mm-hmm. Anything that's flaking is dead. It's dead skin. So it is a glorified hangnail. The closer it gets to whatever little hinge attachment of skin, that still might have a little bit of some nerve endings in it. But just like a hangnail on your finger, the reason it hurts these guys as bad as it does is because that little flap of tissue is catching on things when they walk. So what you want to do is, clean the paw up, soap and water is just fine, or just water if you have that. And then you're just going to take a pair of scissors, if it's a big enough flap, and you're just going to cut that flap right level to the pad. Just like a hangnail on your finger, if your dog's really reacting to that, you're getting probably too low, but you're going to just cut that big piece of dead tissue off, and it should not hurt. If you're really moving it around a lot as you're trying to cut it, that's what's going to hurt, because it's the movement that hurts down at the hinge. But you just want to cut that off. It's going to increase the healing time, make things easier for your dog, and it's going to make them way more comfortable. Again, to that analogy of a hangnail, it feels so much better once you just trim it down, then it doesn't hurt anymore. And so depending on how deep it is, so I will say, dogs that are more prone to this, so like my little red and white Zara, when hers flakes, it oftentimes isn't flaking that low. So it's not, bleeding ouchy tissue down below. So if I just trim it, oftentimes one night of rest, she's probably okay to run again. And she might be a little tender-footed, and depending on what we're running on, it may not be that bothersome to her. You can try putting these guys in boots afterwards. It's still, it's not helping them with comfort wise. It's not going to make them forget about the fact that they're missing a chunk of their pad down here. It's like you running on a blister. You could put more comfortable shoes on. You're still not going to know that you have a blister. So, again, ideally just avoiding it. I soak these guys' paws too in some Epsom salt water. So plain Epsom salt, it's cheap. You can buy it anywhere. And usually it's easiest with dogs. I just sprinkle it in a bathtub and they soak all 4 feet. It doesn't matter if, the other 3 feet are fine. And let them stand there for about 3 to 5 minutes. And I do that once to twice a day for about 3 to 5 days, depending on how things are looking. But it usually keeps them more comfortable. It helps things dry up. It keeps it clean. And just helps them heal faster. Again, boots, you can add some padding. You're still not eliminating the fact that there's a sore there. There, are people who have tried things like moleskin. Some dogs, I think, are more responsive to that than others. I think the hard thing is just it's going to fall off. Dogs do not keep things on their pads. That's where they're sweating through. And so it's just tough.
What about an antibiotic ointment and wrapping it? Or is it better to keep it wide open to breathe?
I usually like to put some layer on it because the way these are healing versus, wounds on your skin that are healing side to side, things are closing. What's happening with a pad is a little bit different of its healing, kind of from the basement membrane and up. And if it's really oozy, it's going to be sticky. So you can get all sorts of crud in there, from dirt. And so I do like to at least put a little sock on these. And especially because they're tender, it's like a skinned knee, your dog is going to want to lick it. And the minute they lick it, you are going to be adding days to
Right.
because they're going to ruin their feet after that. They'll give themselves a dermatitis in between all their toes because they have saliva drenching everything everywhere. So you want to keep it covered up. As far as putting an ointment on it, you can bag balm, you can do some triple antibiotic ointments, especially if it's clean. My one caution with ointments, again, is that dogs really want to lick these. It's very accessible to get to your pads and to your paws, and most dogs already have some level of it's a comfort thing to lick their feet. Anything you add to their feet may make them more prone to wanting to lick it. And every dog's a little bit different there. But that's where, especially if they don't have a cone on or they don't have their paw covered up, I almost never put anything on their foot, because the minute you put ointment there, they're going to know you put ointment there and they're going to be obsessive about trying to get it off. And sometimes these things sting. So we need to think about that too. Some of the products, like the pad hardening products that are out there, which I don't really think are great. They seem to work better on paws that are intact, pads that are intact. if you put that stuff on a pad that has a sore on it, your dog will act like you lit its foot on fire.
Okay.
I've done it. So, and you'll make it that much worse. So a lot of those products, especially the pad care products, are designed to be used on intact pads. Anything else, and if your dog reacts negatively to it, you know that you chose badly.
Is there any need for an oral antibiotic in this situation?
Usually not.
Okay.
The main reason I put these guys on an antibiotic is because I'll see them 2 to 3 days later and the dog has been sucking on its foot the whole time. And so by then they've given themselves a dermatitis in between their pads. But, the pad itself is, usually they heal quite quickly. If they're just given, some time off and keep the dog's tongue from it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about nail beds. So the situations when we get cracked nails and that red inflammation area around the nail beds, like that have been common in the couple days that we've been hunting in the snow.
Yeah. And so, especially that crusty snow or the snow that's starting to melt, which might have been what you guys were in, nice, like light powdery snow that you can, blow off your hand, probably not going to be a problem. When it's really cold, it's not going to make balls in their feet. If you can't make a snowball in your hand, your dog's probably going to be fine as it's around and running. I think the other place that you'll see that is, when you're pheasant hunting stubble fields. I mean, we'll just tear the crap out of, excuse me, but we'll your dog's feet.
You're fine.
But snow can be really hard, and it makes sense. You have all of this, pressure and sharp little pieces jamming up, and it's like somebody shoving on your cuticle again and again and again and again. So again, from that idea of prevention, that is definitely where I think about boots. And kind of using your doggos as an example, Courtney, I would be probably more worried about your Bracco's feet versus your other dog's feet, because Bracco's naturally have feet they're just bigger. They've got bigger toes. So there are certain breeds that you should already be more concerned about their feet. We have an Italian Spinoni who has toes for days, ridiculous. And versus, some dogs will really be bred to have tight feet. So your dogs who are not flushers, who aren't dual purpose dogs, tend to have tighter feet. They were bred to be that way because they're not supposed to be in the water. They're not supposed to be in these other locations. So these upland only dogs tend to have tighter feet. There are some exceptions in there. But so we tend to I see fewer problems with their feet. But things like snow, stubble fields, that is 100% where I would grab some boots. As far as what boots you grab, there's a whole wide variety out there. And so I think it kind of depends on what you're doing and how often do you do it? If you're reaching for him once a year, I would buy the cheapest boots, whatever will stay on their feet.
What about material for that?
So like sled dogs, for example, run primarily in like Cordura little boots, or they'll even run in fleece booties, depending on what the snow is doing, for a couple of reasons. You have a huge team of dogs, and boots don't stay on dogs very well. I don't care how expensive a boot you buy. So you want them to be cheap because you got 4 feet, you got 9 dogs running. You're going to lose a boot, especially in snow. You are going to lose a boot. And so for my snow dogs, I would probably go cheaper, and I would just go with the little Cordura boots or fleece boots, depending on the weather, with the little Velcro straps. And if you lose one in a snowdrift, it's not a big deal. They're light. You can pack extras in your bag. Versus like say a stubble field where good chance I'm going to find my boot if it happens to fall off. And stubble fields are just nasty. So if I really was gonna, make a point of hunting a bunch of stubble fields, I lived in North Dakota. I have that, awesome stubble field in my backyard that I'm going to be hunting every day. I'd probably spring for, some nicer boots. They make boots with Vibram soles, like the fancy, hiking boot soles. That's what I would probably buy my dog. If I'm just cruising through there for one day as I'm driving from the East Coast to, go over and hunt, I'd probably try to get by with just, even the Corduras, especially like that nail bed injury, like you're talking about. Any boot is going to save you from that, because it's that pressure of things hitting that cuticle on the base of your nail. That's the problem. Protecting the bottom of your feet, that's where the integrity of your boot and, maybe how much you spend is going to start to come into play. So I think it does. It really, I don't think anyone should feel limited. I think that bird hunting is a sport that everybody should feel they should be able to get into. And it does seem like it gets more expensive with every passing year. But you shouldn't be afraid that you have to have these super expensive boots, again, unless you're doing it every day, then it's probably your money to buy some.
Oh, hey, speaking of bird dogs, I want to take a quick second to share an opportunity for you to help the AKC Canine Health Foundation, which is the largest nonprofit funder of health research focused solely on dogs. If you're one of my Patreon patrons, a portion of your $5 per month goes to the AKC Canine Health Foundation. I've partnered with them to fundraise for 3 initiatives: hemangiosarcoma, epilepsy, and tick-borne disease. I'll be mailing out one of their calendars to each person that donates, so head over to www.akcchf.org/birddogbabe to designate a dollar amount and which initiative you would like to support. I'll throw in a cool Bird Dog Babe sticker in the mailing as well. Come on, Bird Dog Babe community, let's help this amazing foundation get closer to answers on these issues that are affecting our bird dogs.
Do you have any tips on how to put a boot on so that's not irritating the leg? I feel like when we've used boots, they just cause more damage with irritation, especially the dogs that have dew claws.
Yeah.
That they're rubbing.
Yeah, so I do think, it does depend on your dog's anatomy. I'll use my little Italian Spinoni. So it's my sister's Spinoni. So she actually managed to damage her toe pretty severely. And again, she's a breed that I think is probably more prone to doing that anyways, because they have really prominent toes. And so she got what's called a sprung toe, where she blew a ligament that pushes it up, makes it look like it's almost broken, but you have the ligaments kind of pulling upward. And I placed just a bandage on that paw to kind of support her toes and brace it. And I'm a veterinarian, and the bandage I placed, caused some rubbing between the digits of her feet, because she has such prominent knuckles on her toes. She has such long toes. And I just didn't think enough, I was at home quick and I put a bandage on her, which would have been a beautiful bandage on any other breed. But I think if you have a dog who has super prominent toes, or a dog that maybe doesn't have a lot of hair on their toes, so your bigger pointers, they tend to have longer, more prominent toes. Weimaraners for sure, Rhodesian Ridgebacks, things like that. Our cute little Broncos, or dogs with dew claws, which I also will say I'm actually a proponent of keeping dogs with their dew claws. I think that's really changing in veterinary medicine. We can kind of talk about that of to do or not. But I think the main thing you just have to remember is if I'm going to take a toe, which dogs naturally kind of stand, and when they walk, their feet are apart, like this. I don't know if you can see my hands, but the minute you put them in a boot, this happens. And so every company is a little different in regards to sizing. So I do think it's important to look at their sizing instructions, and they usually want you to look at the outline of the pad of your dog's foot to choose a size. But if you have a dog who really has prominent toes or they're not naturally tight-footed, my girls walk around and their feet are kind of naturally like this. Whereas I look at my little Italian Spinoni and her feet are naturally like this, almost all the time. Her toes are splayed out. If you have a dog more like this, you're going to need to actually pad in between every toe. Those dogs actually need some spacers almost. People do that too. Some, if you're getting bunions, things like that, they make spacers to spread your feet apart to make your shoes more comfortable. So some of you might be familiar with that. For any of the dogs who have dew claws, what I would look for with a boot is either a boot that rides just below the dew claw, or it's all the way above it. And so that both Velcro straps are well above the dew claw and there's room for that dew claw to kind of move around. If you have a Velcro strap that's falling kind of right there, you're going to get into trouble. And so you're going to need to pad underneath that dew claw. I like just cotton rolls that you can kind of tear apart. You can also just use a cotton ball and you can unravel a cotton ball and you can kind of tear chunks of it to just pad in between your toes. So again, some dogs are going to need that and some dogs just aren't. For the dogs that naturally have tighter feet, again, the Brittany's, these little dogs that just, their feet they're tight, they're snug. Those dogs, a lot of times what I'll do is I just buy baby socks, cheap little baby socks, Walmart. And I'll put that on first and then I'll put their boot on over top of that. That seems to give them some cushion. It's the reason we wear socks in our shoes. Most shoes are not designed to be worn without some level of padding on the inside. If you wore your favorite pair of shoes without a pair of socks, you'd probably get a blister. Going back to the start of our conversation about conditioning, if you're going to have a dog that's running in boots, it needs to be conditioned in the boots that it's running in. We've all done that. You bought the new pair of hiking boots and then you didn't really wear them enough. And then you went hunting. And you were cursing the new pair of boots that you bought. It's not the boots' fault,
Right.
It's fault for not remembering to do that. They have to have some time working in any footwear that you put on them, because that'll also help with little calluses, and it'll also help you learn. You can look at their feet after you've done a conditioning session and be like, oh, they're getting a little bit of redness here. And again, on those long-toed dogs, where they tend to rub is right at the knuckles, or you'll have actually that they have a nail that once you squeeze their foot together, all of a sudden their own nail is driving into the toe next to it. So you'll see where you need to put padding versus they hunted for 4 hours and then you looked at their foot and you're like, I made some mistakes there. So,
Right.
That's probably, the most important thing of just, what boots do they need? How much do I really need boots at all? And then training them in those boots.
What about are they rubber or inner tube boots? Like the ones that are recommended for cacti?
Yeah. So
what's your opinion?
Yeah. So there's boots you can buy. And then there are a ton of YouTube channels, things about building boots out of bicycle tires, which I looked at a lot. And honestly, I was like, by the time I run around all over town to try to find bicycle tires and then cut them to size, I was like, I could have just bought these boots that are a little more expensive. But, so the rubber boots of the world are primarily for the heavy cactus places. And you and I were talking before everybody joined in, Montana does have cactus. I find most of the time the spines that we're running around in, you probably don't need something that heavy duty. Most of the time when you're busting out these really thick bicycle boots or the heavy rubber boots is going to be in the Southwest when you're chasing, quail down there, or, even potentially for some of our chucker dogs. But I would caution there that I think because of where you chase chucker, I would really want my dogs to have full mobility of their feet, and the way dog paws are designed, it's so that, they're just beautiful, but, they're designed to really mold around a rock and tilt and bounce off one toe, do all these fancy things. And chucker hunting is a terrain that's so, aggressive, and you want them to be agile, because otherwise they could, they can get into trouble. You got cliffs, you got all sorts of things around there. So I run my own girls when they go down into the Southwest and they chase quail, they get heavy duty boots because of the sand spurs and nasty
Right.
different varieties of cactus.
Can you throw out some name brand boots that you would recommend?
I honestly, for the rubber boots, I've had them for so many years now. I apologize. I do not know the name of the ones that we bought that I use in the Southwest.
Okay.
They are pretty inexpensive. I don't want to say they're still carried by Lyon County Supply, but I do not remember their name. As far as other boots for like doing snow work or doing stubble fields, if you wanted to get, a nicer boot that you planned on using quite frequently, Kurgo makes a really lovely boot that has a Vibram sole on it, with adjustable Velcro, a pretty nice breathable top that's still protective, and it's pretty agile. The bottom of it is pretty mobile. I think they make a really nice boot. That would probably be my main one that I would recommend.
Okay.
And that's Kurgo. But there's quite a few other companies out there that are creating some boots. I think Outward Hound has a boot that's very similar to Kurgo's boot. And are designed kind of for running and for people working on trails, or playing on trails. So
What about the toenails that are ripping out or cracking when we're out hunting? What can we do for those?
yeah, so from that preventative standpoint, again, everybody having a nail trim before they go out and keeping their nails trimmed, just routinely all year round. It does help keep their nails shorter. The quick or the vascular aspect of the nail does slowly grow out as the nail gets longer. So if we're only trimming nails, once in a blue moon, you end up with nails that are long and can't be backed up much, but if you keep them nice and short, they will remain shorter. Again, there are certain breeds that tend to have pretty substantial nails. Again, your bigger dogs, my little Italian Spinoni, again, her nails are just impressive, even though I keep them trimmed, the size of them. And so, hopefully you'll avoid those things if you keep the nails shorter. If they're cracked out in the field, or actually torn. So if you have a nail that's all of a sudden going at like a 45-degree angle to where it's supposed to be, that nail is not attached anymore. And it can be bleeding, and the dogs will have a huge hissy fit about that. It's not comfortable for them. But really what you do is you quick grab it with your pair of forceps that everybody should have on their vest. And you just do a sharp tug and you yank that nail off. I know it sounds a little horrible.
Do we need to put a muzzle on our dog while we're doing that?
I probably would. Yep. If you happen to be near a nice cold river, have your dog stand in the river first, numb those feet up. And then, most of these nails are so loose, it's shocking how little pressure it takes to remove it.
Okay.
But again, that's where it's kind of like a big glorified hangnail that as they're moving, that's what hurts. And it's what we're going to do if you bring them in to us. There are some dogs that need to be sedated for that, because they haven't had a lot of footwork done, or maybe they even did, but pain is just a new thing for them, and they're not allowing you to do anything. Some of these kids need to be sedated. Again, most nails, ideally at least, they do tend to break as kind of one big piece, and you just pop the nail off and go, and you'll see a little bit of the quick that is exposed underneath. Then I usually put a bandage on these guys, and it's the equivalent of basically you flicking off your entire nail, except they're then running on that. Again, everybody hates the word rest, but I think that's the kindest thing to do, trying to force these guys to then run through a field, which they will do full-heartedly. It's gotta just hurt horribly though. And we sometimes have to be, we have to be the advocate for our own dogs and not, allow them to hurt themselves just because they're totally willing to do so. You can get bone infections, to kind of worst case scenario. So if people, really abuse their dog's feet after that, and force them to, then go play in the muck and the grossness, and then the dog is licking at this nail bed. Dog nails are a little bit different, that they do, kind of feed through and attach to the underlying bone tissue there. And so you can, in theory, get a bone infection, from really damaging a nail and causing trauma and then infection to come in. I try to scare people with that sometimes when they don't want to rest the dog afterward. So you want them to rest. It will take a long time for that nail to regrow. It's not that they have to take off a month of hunting, but I usually tell people they need to have at least, a week off, just to allow the nail to kind of grow down, or for that quick to cover up a little bit. So that they're comfortable to run again. And if they still are acting tender-footed, that would maybe be where I would boot them again. If you have a dog that just cracks a nail, which they'll sometimes do, they'll have maybe just a tiny piece that's flaking off. Again, ideally, you would trim that piece off that's loose. That you can't yank, and I wouldn't try to yank it. Your dog will get real mad at you then. But the piece that's flaking, ideally you want to try to trim that to the top of wherever it's broken. If it's really, horribly cracked, again, that's where a boot can be nice, just covering it up. I have even I've done really thin pieces of tape that I've put over a nail that was damaged. There are some different, glues that you can put. I think you have to be careful anytime you're trying to glue a nail back together. It's really easy to glue your dog's toes together. I've also been there, which they're not appreciative of, especially long-haired dogs. If you get any sort of adhesive at the base of the nail, because nails are mobile, they're supposed to move around quite a bit at the bit of that toe. If you glue the skin down to that nail, you're now going to have a dog that is super obsessed with licking that paw because you ruined it. The mobility of it. They're not going to like the way that feels. So if you're going to attempt any sort of, lacquer nail polish, there's a lot of things out there about, kind of trying to cover up a crack. You want to make sure that hair is all trimmed away, that you don't get any adhesive in their hair, and that, it is strictly going on the nail itself, and that the nail is clean. You're not locking infection in there. So I would be, very cautious about adding any sort of, glue to a nail. Usually just trimming it back and trimming the pieces that are loose is sufficient. If you're really trying to glue something back together, it may not be something you should be gluing together.
Right. What about going back to the snow topic? Does it help if the dogs that have coat or even wire hairs that don't have necessarily the setter type hair, if we trim up their paws, trim the hair around there?
Yeah.
Does that help keep the snow, or is it just going to make more room for more in there?
I definitely trim the hair away from dog feet. I think it's very helpful for snowballs. I did not trim the hair on my dog's feet for this trip because I didn't really think I would need to yet. I wasn't thinking about snow. And I was telling you the other night, we got into just some gumbo, had to cross it canal that had recently been drained. And it was horrible. It's the worst mud I've ever seen. And it was just like glue that you couldn't move it out from between their feet. We tried to get them to walk in a creek. It wouldn't come off. And by the time we got back to our little rental here, it was just cement, just solid rock. Their feet were splayed apart because they had so much mud that was dried. And I do think that would have been better if they didn't have as much hair on their toes. And I did trim some of the hair off their feet today for that very reason. But from a snow perspective, I think keeping the hair trimmed off the bottom of their feet, especially if they're super hairy, musher's wax is really nice. And then watching the temperatures, some days you just don't need to worry about it. For the cross-country skiers who are maybe watching this, all about picking wax by the temperature that's out there. And if it's again a nice cold day where you're blowing the snow out of your hand, your dogs aren't going to have any trouble. They're going to be able to run on that and feel great. If it's, you're starting to be able to make snowballs in your hand, they're going to make snowballs on their feet. And it's amazing how quickly that'll make a big bloody hole in your dog's toes.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned like the Musher Secret. Are you applying that right before they go out on the hunt then?
Yeah. So, Musher's wax, I primarily end up using it during the winter with just cross-country skiing and, regular recreation. I usually haven't been hunting that frequently where they're in the snow, but if you are and have a lot of snow and you're hunting, Musher's wax is great. And you just apply it before you leave. And then I carry it in my backpack. It's a tiny little circular tub. It doesn't weigh much. And when you take a water break, you can reapply, and it's kind of designed so that you can just set a paw in there and kind of do this motion and you're good to go. I have found that, just some plain, deodorants, so not antiperspirants, but deodorants, can sometimes have the same effect. I do think you have to reapply those a little more often than Musher's wax, but just any sort of that kind of oils that they have in there, it does seem to be helpful.
And that works as a repellent then?
Yeah, it makes it so basically just that that they're not going to form those big ice balls, and it also does seem to protect the pads a little bit too. Some dogs seem to be a little more prone to having some cracking of their pads with snow. Seems to affect them kind of more right at the base of their nails. And again, that's just kind of that abrasiveness there. So I do think the Musher's wax is nice for that too.
Perfect. Embedded objects, so like the cactus, when they are on there, yesterday I had a hemostat with, in my vest, and so we were just using that to pull the cactus off the dogs. But then when we got home last night and really put a flashlight on there, it was shocking how much more we were pulling out of their feet.
Yeah. And so, it is, you want to pull them when you're in the field. And I have found, especially depending on what color your dog's feet are, some dogs' spines stand out really well. Other dogs, I swear cactus was just designed to hide beautifully. Unless you're in the right light, you can't see it, but you can always feel it. So I am much more, I look first, I spread their toes apart. There's a hidden crevice right at the very tippy top. Most dogs have this kind of huge crevice that they can hide a whole host of problems, cheatgrass, cactus spines. And sometimes to get into that crevice, the best thing to do is actually to pull on the hair right above it, and it kind of inverts it out and you can see. But for these really long-toed dogs, sometimes it's hard to get that skin to roll out so that you can see. So again, feel is huge. And so I feel in between my dog's toes, and you will find spines that way. It's my favorite way for finding cheatgrass. Again, on my little redhead, and then even my tricolor setter, she's got brown on her feet. Of course she does.
Mm.
And so, which is the exact same color as cheatgrass fronds. So I can't see them, but I can feel them. They're going to feel different. So, really doing a good thorough paw massage and feeling interdigitally is really important in giving those little pockets. And then if anything is present, plucking it out or pulling it out, you are gonna break a cactus spine off. It's gonna happen. And for the most part, don't overly worry about it. I have people come in, they're like, I know that there's a cactus spine that she stepped on, and we want you guys to, cut it open now and find it. And until they have an issue, and even once they have an issue, we'll have dogs, they start to get kind of draining tracks between their toes. Most of the time, the object that has caused that has already been dealt with. Most of the time. There's a small exception of there are these ones that, it really does. It gets in there, it gets sealed off, and we have to go surgically, investigate. But most of these dogs, especially again on a pad, so my little Zara had a big old prickly pear that stuck her right in her carpal pad. And when I pulled it, I know I broke some spines off. But because, these are pads, and again, they're kind of like your fingers, this is all flaking. All this skin is going to die and shed and fall off. And so that's what happens with your dog's pads too. So even if they had a little cactus spine in there, they're constantly losing skin cells, sloughing the keratin, making new keratin. That's going to move out and off. So it's not the end of the world. Don't, get all afraid if you're in the field and you lost a little cactus tip in something. It's going to.
Okay. Does soaking them in Epsom salt or anything help them make their way out any faster?
I don't know that I don't think it helps them come out any faster. I do, when you have a drain tract, which usually that's more secondary to cheatgrass is the real big thing, or foxtail awns. Once those actually have a draining tract in between toes, I do love to use Epsom salt soaks then, or warm water soaks in general. That's going to be really helpful.
Okay. What did you soak your dog's feet in last night with the gumbo to get that out?
Dawn dish soap and water.
And it worked?
And it worked. Yeah. No.
Good.
Dawn dish soap is the best. There's a reason they use it for, oil spills and things like that. It works great at breaking down anything that's sticky and gumbo-y. So yeah.
Perfect. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on, Dr. Meg, that maybe that we didn't cover?
I can't think of anything right now. I think the biggest thing is just realizing the feet that you have and the breed that you have. And it's not a knock against any breed. Some breeds have big gangly toes, and that's part of why they're bred that way. They're supposed to have some gangly features, but knowing those things about your dog, I think that's the most important thing of what to expect before you get out there, so you're not surprised. And not to, don't feel bad. I think some people really feel bad that, they have a dog that has feet that are maybe more sensitive. It just is. And I think that, it can be worked with and managed well. And there's nothing wrong with your dog because, that happens to it. Speaking of, I have to let my dog in this room because she's crying, sobbing because she's where I am. She's crying at the door. Come here, sweetie.
Now she's happy.
Yes, she's happy. Here, you want to come up? You go. Oh, this is my big girl. But Lark is a little stiff, and so she needs some help on the bed. Yes,
there she is.
Mm-hmm.
Are you're talking about stiffness. Are you giving them like a meloxicam or anything before and after the hunts?
So they do, my girls I have two that have some underlying back issues that I keep a very close eye on when we're hunting. And so Lark gets some medications before she heads out.
Okay.
And then my other two, I usually do just a post hunting anti-inflammatory, and instead of giving it to them in the morning. But they've all done pretty well. In general, for my dogs, they're on a joint diet all year round. I do start adding in a higher protein, higher fat diet once the hunting season comes around, to kind of help protect their joints. And then they're on some joint supplements as well year round, which I think is helpful. But I think some dogs really need anti-inflammatories and should have them. I think the majority of dogs do not need anti-inflammatories, which is great. Just like the majority of people don't necessarily, need to take anything to go out there and work out. I have some folks that, want to just pre-med their dogs with, no medical reason, just because they're worried. And that's not a safe route either, especially when they're working hard. I think anti-inflammatories are things we have to remember are best in really well-hydrated animals. And they can cause kidney issues and they can cause liver issues. They need to be used carefully, but at the same time, if your dog needs them, they absolutely should have them. I don't want anyone afraid to give them, because that's what keeps them in the field and keeps them happy and hopefully helps them not become injured.
To touch on the one that I had messaged to me earlier today, that she lives in town and conditioning. What do you think? I mean, how much help is a sidewalk going to be if you have maybe like a bike attachment going on the sidewalk or the road? Is that going to help?
I think it absolutely can. And I super applaud her. I would also tell her, there's a couple really fun Instagram accounts that she can follow about, raising bird dogs in the city. There are a lot of groups to help you. Again, my first bird dog ever, that was truly mine, and not our family's dog. I raised and trained living in downtown Portland. So there, I actually think her feet were almost better off than some of these dogs that live in, the green pastures. Because, sidewalks come in a lot of different variations. Again, there's, your high school tracks that you can run on. There's the dirt roads you can walk on. And so a lot of these times, these dogs, I think city dogs can have much tougher feet than some of their country brethren, because they're used to being on, these pretty extreme, hard surfaces. In some ways she might be better off, which is kind of, most people don't think about it that way, raising a bird dog in the city.
Sarah, I saw a hand raised. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I came in late, so you may have discussed this already, but
no worries.
My dog tends to have issues with kind of between the pads. And I'll, full disclosure, I live in California, do a lot of desert running. So I don't know if that's just kind of a just a conditioning thing, just because of the abrasion and perhaps the movement on the rocks. But what kind of recommendations would you give for, I guess the beginning of the season? It seems to get a little bit better, but you can only take maybe a couple hours of that. Other than booting, is there any other thing I can do to help with that?
Yeah, so I think the different substrate training is going to be key for you, because the surfaces you're probably running on too are going to be ones where they're splaying a little bit more, because that surface underneath their feet is shifting. The scree slopes, rock, sand, that's all really going to all of a sudden cause, half your paw to go down. So that interdigital space is going to be more in contact with the ground. And so, doing a lot of activities of even, breaking and stopping as far as conditioning, that can help with that interdigital space. Booting is, definitely can, some of these places I think are just, they're so hard and they're so tough. but switching what substrates you're working on too will help with that interdigital space. Do your dogs have a lot of hair in between their toes, or not so much?
I would say medium. It's definitely not bare under there, but it does get a little more bare as the season goes through because California has a lot of foxtails and stuff. So after I check, like the post-exercise check, I'm usually pulling stuff out, and that inevitably pulls hair out too. So it'll get a little thinner as we progress through the season.
Well, in that interdigital space too, the other big thing, that where that tends to really get angry is if you have dogs that are really licking at their interdigital space. That's it loves to hold saliva, and that's also where they're losing a lot of heat. And so even when you're getting back, for your dogs doing some, foot baths, or clean, making sure their feet are nice and cleaned off so that hopefully they're not licking at that area, may also help them, be a little bit stronger. But as far as like ointments or things to rub on their feet before you go out, I don't think there's really anything I would recommend there. I think if there's more opportunity, depending on where you are in California, doing some conditioning on, if you're near the ocean at all, actually doing some conditioning in sand, that would probably really help their feet out a lot and get them also their agility up in regards to kind of their toes and their tendon strength, because you're really going to be shifting. And then they might be a little better prepared for a hunting season.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. I think that's all I have. Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Bird Dog Babe podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and learned something from the content, please share it with your friends. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on whichever platform you're listening from. Check out the show notes for links to references from this episode, as well as info on how to connect through Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you're loving this podcast and want to support the production and content, please consider becoming one of my Patreon patrons. Being a patron connects us more on a personal level, where I'm able to help answer questions and give advice. My husband William and I have bred, owned, and trained AKC Master Hunters, Field Champions, NAVDA VCs, and AKC Show Champions. We're excited to not only share what we've learned, but also listen from previous and future episode guests for additional content. Go to patreon.com/thebirddogbabe and $5 per month and you're in. Through the Patreon platform, 5% is donated towards conservation and an additional 5% is donated to the AKC Canine Health Foundation.
Until next time, Bird Dog Babes, keep them versatile.